Good evening and welcome to our Bible study. If you have your Bibles, kindly turn with me to Genesis chapter 25. Genesis chapter 25. We were first introduced to Abraham in Genesis chapter 11, and now we've made it halfway through the book of Genesis. Genesis has 50 chapters, and we've arrived at Genesis chapter 25, and we've come to the last days of the patriarch Abraham, the father of the Jewish nation, and our father in a spiritual sense. So we've come to the end of his life. We were introduced to him in Genesis 11 towards the end, and now we've come to Genesis 25, the last part of his life, the end of his life. There in the Bible, you'll find many widows, women who've lost their husbands and then they live on. But here we're going to read about the widower Abraham and what he does after that, after he loses his wife Sarah and after he arranges for the marriage of Isaac and Rebekah through his servant who was probably Eliezer. Now we're going to see his last few days, what he does. He gets remarried, and after a while, after he and his new wife give birth to a couple of sons, he will breathe his last. So he's basically getting older and older. Somebody once said that Abraham would not have had any peer pressure because he wouldn't have had any peers at his age because he keeps on living. He outlives many of the people around him, and of course, the lifespan has got considerably shorter when compared to the antediluvian period, the time before Noah, the time before the flood, and many explanations have been offered. Some people say the diet changed before they were vegetarians that caused them to live longer. Some people say the ozone layer had depleted. There was a cloud before, there was a water vapor before that protected all those harmful UV rays from coming in. So different explanations have been offered. The fact still remains that the lifespan, the longevity keeps on. There's no more. There are the people are living shorter and shorter lives, though it's longer than people live today. Abraham lives, as we will see later, to the ripe old age of 175 years. He's getting older and older. I heard about these two women at a church, elderly women, older women, and then one woman comes up to this lady and she says, the real challenge, the hard thing about getting old is you start forgetting things. You can't remember. Your memory gets worse as you advance in your as you grow older. And she says, I've known you. She tells the other lady, I've known you my whole life, but I can't remember for the life of me your name. I've forgotten your name. Could you kindly tell me your name? And the other lady thinks for a few seconds and she says, do I have to tell you right now? Because both of them had trouble remembering, both of them had lapses in their memory. And so, like that, we come even here, to the end of Abraham's life. He is growing older and older. They say somewhere I came across this saying that you're getting older when all the names in your contacts end in MD. That is basically, I think you have a long list of doctors, or you get tired. You know you're old when you get tired just playing chess, or you know you're getting older when you sink your teeth into a piece of steak and they stay there. That is your teeth. Or when you're trying to straighten the wrinkles in your socks, and then you discover you're not wearing socks, or your pacemaker accidentally opens the garage door, or you bend over to tie your shoes and you think, what else can I do when I'm down there? What else maybe can I pick up? I dropped something a while ago. Now that I'm down there, let me do some other work as well. The book of Psalms, chapter 90, verse 10, says that the average life expectancy of a man is 70, and then perhaps if you're strong, maybe, yeah, you'll go on to live till you're 80. So somebody divided man's life into seven different sections, and all the words rhyme. So 7 decades. If you live to the age of 77 decades, periods of 10 years. So the first 10 years, it's all about spills, and then it becomes drills, and then it's thrills, and then you're paying bills, and then come the ills. So you're taking pills, and finally you're dealing with wills. So that's a very creative way of putting it. So we don't know much about Abraham's early life, because when we introduced him in Genesis 11, he's already married. So we don't know what he was doing as a kid and all that. Not much information about that. But now we have a lot of information towards the end of his life, in the middle of his life. And we see all the improvements, we see all the sanctification, we see all the hang ups, the hurt, the times he messed up, the times where he displayed a lack of faith. But now we see that he's finishing strong, and I like that it focuses on the end of his life, and there's more information, at least preserved for us in Scripture, about his about his life at the end, because it's really important how we finish. All of us might have had a wobbly start. We might look back and we might have certain regrets and all certain choices that we made, which we're not very proud of. But what's important, just like Caleb in the Bible, is that we finish strong, that we fight the good fight, as Apostle Paul said, and that we finish really strong, and we stay consistent in the faith, and we endure to the end, just like I think Abraham does, as we'll read now. So starting in verse 1, let me read the first 6 verses of chapter 25. Abraham took another wife, whose name was Keturah. She bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Jokshan fathered Sheba and Dedan. The sons of Dedan were Ashurim, Letushim, and Leumim. The sons of Midian were Ephah, Epher, Hanok, Abida, and Eldah. All these were children of Keturah. Abraham gave all that he had to Isaac, but to the sons of his concubines Abraham gave gifts, and while he was still living, he sent them away from his son Isaac eastward to the east country. Just turn my phone on silent so that we're not disturbed. So we're told over here that he took another wife. Now, the first thing that I want to clarify over here is, in some texts, for example, 1 Chronicles 32, it says that Keturah was his concubine, but in Genesis 25:1, it says it was his wife. Even if you read verse 6, it says he gave the sons of his concubine. So again, the understanding is that both Keturah and Hagar, Genesis 16, where we first introduced to her, are concubines. But then here it calls Keturah his wife. So there's that confusion. People say, is that a contradiction? Because 1 Chronicles 32 says that Keturah was his concubine. Here it says it's his wife. Is there a contradiction in the Bible? So people say either she was a concubine, she started off as a concubine and then later became Abraham's wife, or what I think is, there's this one scholar called Victor Hamilton, and he says that back in the day, where during the time of the patriarchs, there was no concrete term to describe the status that this kind of a person had, the status that Keturah had. So basically, she was like, if you could say, a wife of a lower status. She didn't share the same status as Sarah did, but she was also his wife. At the same time, she was his concubine. So using both these terms, wife and concubine, they're trying to aim for some sort of in-betweenness between that stage, because the word concubine, it takes on a firmer meaning during the days of David and Solomon, and that was a different kind, that had a slightly different connotation than it does over here, according to this Hebrew scholar Victor Hamilton and one more rabbi. So basically, they're saying that the authors, because there was no concrete term to just describe a wife who was not as important as Sarah, they interchanging both these terms so that you arrive at that understanding that it's something in between a concubine and an actual wife that is like Sarah. And again, she's not exactly a concubine, she's not exactly a wife, it's something in between that. They're saying she's a wife of lowest status compared to Sarah. And so that, I think that's the view that makes more sense, rather than she was a concubine and then became. And this is repeated even with Jacob, and when Rachel gives Jacob her servant Bilhah, same thing is repeated. Bilhah is also called a concubine and Jacob's wife. So it doesn't have the word concubine over here, is not as it shouldn't be looked at as a concubine was looked at during the times of David and Solomon. That is a slightly different meaning over there. So that's the first thing I wanted to clarify as we began, because it says Abraham took another wife. In verse 6, it refers to her as a concubine. So whose name was Keturah. Keturah, the name means scented one or perfumed one. Maybe she lived up to her name, maybe she didn't, we don't know, but it means perfumed one. And Abraham in total had 8 sons, one son through Sarah, who was the son of promise Isaac, one son through Hagar. Now he has 6 sons over here. So Hagar's son was Ishmael. Now he has 6 sons through Keturah. And we don't know. We don't know. The Bible doesn't say why Keturah married Abraham. Maybe it was his wealth. Maybe she felt secure. We don't know exactly. And because sometimes we don't even know, like everything that happened in that culture, because we're so far removed from that culture, we don't know. Because at his age, for him to get married, but that doesn't mean that people as they grow older lose their need for love. It's all the same. If you need to be loved when you're young, when you're 10 years old, you need to be loved when you're 80 years old as well. And maybe he also needed company. Billy Graham had one singer, in the sense, this gentleman, I think his name was Bernard. Yeah, I think his name was Bernard Shea, Shea, and he was like an American Canadian gospel singer, and he would go around sometimes and he would say lead worship in the Billy Graham concerts where he preached. So not concerts, the all those crusades rather, and so he would go and lead worship, and so I think when he was somewhere in his late 60s or something, he lost his first wife and then he got remarried again. And he lived on to the ripe old age of 104. He died in 2013. So, sometimes everybody needs that, everybody needs to be loved, and that companionship is really important. So Abraham, after Sarah died, after a couple of years, he gets remarried, possibly because of the companionship, and also because God's first commandment to Abraham was to be fruitful and multiply. God's promise to Abraham was that he would be a father of many people. And so he for the sake of company, for the sake of continuing the family line, Abraham gets married, and she bears him 6 sons, and their names are mentioned over here. And from them come many people groups. For example, if you look at Median, you know who the people group that comes from Median, the son whose name Median, it's the Medianites, who later we know, to escape the wrath of Pharaoh, Moses runs away to Midian and he meets his wife Zipporah over there. His father-in law's name is Jethro, who was a priest, which then gives us, at least tells us, that the Midianites knew the God of Abraham because Jethro was a priest. And so Moses spends 40 years over there. This is the same guy who that people group come from, the Midianites. So they're all mentioned over here, all these different names over here. Abraham, again, when you read this, one of the things you realize is that when Sarah was not able to give birth, and when I think the fertility issue was with Sarah and not, at least physically speaking, in the natural sense, it was with Sarah who had the fertility problem. There's nothing wrong in that sense with Abraham's body. It was Sarah who was barren, because over here, even at this age, he's still able to have children with Keturah. So let me read now from verse 5. It says that Abraham gave, I just want to point this out before we go on to the next set of verses. He says he gave everything that he had to Isaac, but to the and this is because he was the son of promise, and God said that it is through Isaac my offspring will be named. So he gives him all the wealth. He puts, somebody said, where there is a will, there is an argument, because everybody has confusion as to who will inherit, and then all the fights will start. So he makes it very clear. He sets his house in order. Even there's a story where Isaiah, comes to King Hezekiah, and he tells him, put your house in order because you're going to die. He just tells him plainly, get everything in order. And we know that Jesus did that on the cross as well, when he looks to John and says, son, behold your mother, and mother, behold your son. Many people misapply that verse and say that that is Jesus presenting Mary to the world as Mother Mary, but what he was doing was just undertaking for his mother. And again, in 1 Timothy, Paul tells people, and of course the Christian father, the Christian husband, that he has to look after his household, because if he does not look after his relatives, especially his immediate family, then he's worse than an infidel or an unbeliever. So all these instructions in the Bible point to the fact that a person, the head of the family, should put things in order, should take care of their household, provide for them, be a shelter, be a covering for them. Now Abraham is becoming older, and before maybe he is incapable of making those decisions, he puts things in order. He gives everything that he has to the rightful inheritor, who's Isaac, his son through Sarah, the child of promise. But he's also a generous man. So in verse 6, it says that he gives all the other sons that he had through Keturah a lot of gifts, and he sends them away so that there's no scope for potential for misunderstanding and fights later. So he said, gives them their gifts and he sends them on their way. So verses 7 to 11, I'll read now. These are the days of the years of Abraham's life, 175 years. Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. Isaac and Ishmael, his sons, buried him in the cave of Machpelah in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar the Hittite, east of Mamre, the field that Abraham purchased from the Hittites. There, Abraham was buried with his wife, with Sarah, his wife. After the death of Abraham, God blessed Isaac, his son, and Isaac settled at Beer Lahai Roi. So Jay Warren Meggie, a well-known Bible teacher, you still can hear his sermons because it was all recorded and on the radio. He's a good Bible teacher. He used to say to, especially towards the end of his life, when he was getting older and older, he used to say, "I'm not going to retire till God retires me." In other words, he was saying, "I'm not going to stop preaching. I'm not going to stop my ministry until God finally calls me home." And it was the same even with Abraham. It should be the same with all of us as well. But death comes to Abraham. I mean, Abraham is a really important because he is the father of the Jewish nation, and yet he does die. Death comes to everybody, and we've been talking a lot about that over the last few weeks. That death is not a respecter of persons. The statistics are pretty impressive. I think, as C.S. Lewis would say, 1 out of 1 person, like everybody dies, unless, of course, you're Elijah or Enoch, who walked with God and then he was not. So 70 times in the New Testament, Abraham is mentioned in the New Testament. So he's a pretty important figure in human history, the one that God chose, the one with whom the nation of Israel started, and yet he dies. Not like God preserves him and he lives longer or he gets miraculously taken up or anything. He dies just like everybody else will. The only other person who's mentioned more than Abraham in the New Testament is Moses, who's mentioned about 80 times. But over here it says, an old man and full of years. In the Hebrew, the word of years is not there. It actually just says an old man and full, meaning he lived a full life. We sometimes use that phrase when we go to the funeral of somebody who has in fact lived a full life, lived to a ripe old age, and did a lot of things, accomplished a lot. We say they lived a full life. So I think that's the sense in which it's used over here. He was old and full, but the English translators supplied those two words, full of years, and he was gathered to his people. Both the sons are there, Isaac and Ishmael. Confuse that a little bit. His sons buried him in the cave of Machpelah, which you remember, I think, in the previous chapter, he bought when his wife Sarah, not the previous, the 23rd chapter, he buys to bury Sarah. He has that negotiation and he buys it from the Hittites. So he's buried there with Sarah. Sometimes Muslims, I think, Muslims believe that Abraham is buried in Mecca, but the truth is that cave is still there. Even now, till today, you can go to this cave where Abraham is buried. I don't know because of the hostility whether you can go there, but it's a very well preserved archaeological site, and you can see this place where Abraham is buried with all the others. So he's laid to rest over there, and then it says after his death, God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac settled at Beer Lahai Roi, which is the same place that Hagar ran to. That well was there, so there's not much there except for this well. That's where Hagar saw the Lord, where she heard where God reached out to her when she runs away, when she was sent away from Abraham's home. So let me read from verses 12 to 18 now. It goes on to tell us that these are the generations of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar the Egyptian Sarah's servant bore to Abraham. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael named in the order of their birth: Nebaioth, the firstborn of Ishmael, and Kedar, and Adbeel, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadad, Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedema. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names by their villages and by their encampments, 12 princes according to their tribes. These are the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years. He breathed his last and died, and was gathered to his people. They settled from Havilah to Shur, which is opposite Egypt in the direction of Assyria. He settled over against all his kinsmen. So, what we have here is the descendants of Ishmael now listed for us, basically to show us the historical accuracy of the Bible, and also, so that we can trust the Bible and we know, and also to show us that Ishmael was blessed by God, as he said, as he promised to Hagar. Of course, when we read Genesis 16, the prediction is that he'll be a wild donkey of a man. But sometimes we think that that's a curse, but actually it's kind of a, in a sense, it's a compliment, or at least it's pointing to the fact that he'll be that there's this animal called the onager, and it's an animal that is completely independent and has very good survival skills. It looks like a donkey, and that's the reference over there, the wild donkey, referring to him, saying that he'll be fiercely independent. He'll be on his own. He will be a mighty man. He will be a man of war. And even if you read the Quran today, which was developed much later in the 7th century by Prophet Muhammad. He there are a lot of verses on war over there. I've written down there are 109 verses on war in the Quran. So one for I think every 55 verses. So the prediction was right. His hand will be against everybody, and everybody will be against him. And the Muslims today respect Ishmael as well. They consider him to be a prophet, an apostle. According to Surah 954, they think that, they respect Ishmael, and they revere him. So they, he was blessed. He was blessed by God according to this genealogy. He had many sons. He had he There were 12 princes according to their tribes, and then finally he breathed his last at the age of 137, and then the settlement is given to us where they settled, but it's difficult to identify where those areas are today. But somewhere in the Arabian desert, the ancient Arabian desert. So let me continue from verses 19 onwards. These are the generations now of Isaac. It's there, the generations are mentioned for us, but the Bible, as we read it, it becomes obvious, becomes apparent that there's only one line, one genealogical line that it's really, really concerned with, and that's the line of the Messiah. But all these generations are preserved for us, so that we know the Bible is not making up stories. The authors have preserved it for us to know all these things. Now we hear the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham fathered Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel the Aramean of Paddan Aram, the sister of Laban the Aramean, to be his wife. And Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren. And the Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. And the children struggled together within her, and she said, "If it is thus, why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, the older will serve the younger." So it's now the camera lens, so to speak, shifts from Abraham and from Sarah and from Hagar and all that they did. We read about Lot, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and all Abraham's bargaining, negotiations, and it talks about his son Isaac. Now the camera zooms in into the children of Isaac and Rebekah, and we're going to be introduced to these new characters, Esau and Jacob. Of course, we're familiar with them, but we've come to halfway through the book of Genesis, now, as I mentioned earlier. So we're told here that Rebecca was also barren, and she was barren, I think, for about 20 years. When you read the rest of the chapter, you can do the calculations. For 20 years, she did not have a child, and we see that Isaac is a prayerful man. He prays to the Lord, seeks the Lord. Even when she was returning, it says that he was out in the field meditating. So he was a man of prayer, and he prays for his wife. The Lord granted. So even though, interesting point is that even though God said that through Isaac my offspring will be named, and there's a promise that you'll have many sons, many daughters, populate the whole earth. Even though that promise, again here there was 20 years of barrenness where Rebecca had to wait. So the promises of God very often come through continued steadfast prayer, over, where you continue to rely on Him, and then when it finally comes, you really, really value it. But God always keeps His promises. But we have our responsibility as well, where we continue to pray and wait on Him, and He will do it. He will fulfill His word, His promises. So He does it. And we're told immediately that after the Lord granted the prayer, Rebecca's wife conceived, and the children struggled together within her. And it says children already over here, which is a giveaway that she's going to have twins. It's not going to be one child. The children struggled within her. Some Jewish legends, and the key word being legends, say that they tried to kill each other. Jacob and Esau tried to kill each other in the womb. Again, some legends will say that when Rebecca went near the idols, Esau would get all excited and jump, but when she worshipped the true living God, Jacob would get excited. These are all legends, but how people try to explain the relationship between these two brothers, even in the womb. So she seeks the Lord, she inquires of the Lord, which is something that we all should do at every important point in our lives. We inquire the Lord, ask Him for His guidance, and God responds and says, two nations, not just two children, two nations are in your womb. Jacob becomes Israel, Esau becomes the father, or the head of the Edomites. And if I'm not mistaken, the book of Obadiah, which is kind of an obscure book in the Old Testament, is actually talking about the pride of the Edomites and the sin of the Edomites, which are actually descendants of Esau. So two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you shall be divided. One shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. Now, when yeah, so he, even though generally, because of the culture of that day, where the older one actually inherits, God has His choice. God has His purpose in election, and He elects, and He says that the younger will serve the older, and one shall be stronger than the other. The older shall serve the younger. And we've gone into election and all that when we were studying Romans chapter 9, and that's explained. And I went into those subjects in some considerable depth when we were covering the book of Romans 9. So verse 24 says, when her days to give birth were completed, behold, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy cloak, so they called his name Esau, which means hairy. Afterward, his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them, and that's where you compare these two verses, you realize that she was barren for about 20 years. So one of the things that strike us first when you read these verses is that God's word is true. He said there are two nations in whom, and back then they never had any. I don't know the exact term when you go to check whether the babies are okay, but basically whatever the equivalent of an X-ray is, they have nothing to check all these things. They don't have a stethoscope to check there are two heartbeats. None of that. God said that there are two babies, two nations in your womb, and exactly like that, there are twins. She has two twins, which means that even the other things that He said, like the older will serve the younger, will be true. It's credible. You can believe and trust in God, which reminds us whenever we doubt God's work in our lives, all we do is look back and see how many times He came through for us, how many times He remained faithful, how many times He rescued us, all those miracles of the past, and we continue to hope in Him. So that's why that's the importance of recollecting. So if He says If he says that there were two nations in womb and we have twins, then they can also rely on God for the other things that he says, because his word always comes true. So Jacob, originally, its original form, the word Jacob doesn't immediately, we always think Jacob means deceiver, conman, rascal, and all those things. But actually, originally, it means God is at my heels protecting me. That's the idea. But then, because he comes out grabbing the heel, literally, his hand is grabbing the heel of his brother Esau, and he comes out. There's this baby. Uh, Esau's born first. In that sense, he's older. And then behind him is Jacob holding on to his heel. He's a heel grabber, and he's a con man, he's a deceiver, and we'll see that as he grows up. So let me continue verses verses 27. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man dwelling in the tents. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once, when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field and he was exhausted. And Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stew, for I am exhausted." Therefore, his name was called Edom. Jacob said, "Sell me your birthright now." Esau said, "I am about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Swear to me now." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew. And he ate and drank and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. So this is a story that many of us are familiar with, but uh, there's according to these verses, there's a time where Esau was really, really famished. He comes and he asks Jacob for some stew. Now, when it says that Jacob was a mild man, it's not that he was effeminate or but he was a homebody. He was somebody who liked to stay at home, maybe help out his mother. And he was as people say today, he was a mama's boy staying at home. But what it means is he was mild mannered. The same word which says that he was a quiet man is also used in the book of Job when it says that he was blameless. So it's the same word. So it's not to say that he was, like uh, effeminate or anything like that, because some people think that way. But it was Esau who was the man's man. He was a hunter, he was skilled, he was strong. And so the father liked Esau because of all the game that he brought, all the animals that he hunted and brought. But Rebecca loved Jacob. And we're told about this deception that he starts deceiving over here, where Jacob asks his brother to sell him his birthright. And in this text, at least, of course, Jacob is trying to deceive, but in this text, at least right now, as we read it, it says Esau despised his birthright. He did not consider the importance and the value of his birthright. It came with spiritual and material blessings, as mentioned later in the Bible, but he didn't realize the importance of it. Esau just said, and somebody said, one preacher I was listening to said that this is the first example of somebody being hangry, which is a combination of being hungry and angry. First example of Esau being angry, where he just sells his birthright just because he's exhausted and he wants something to eat. Such an important thing, he gives it up, and he despised his birthright. The text clearly says. So again, that's a pointer to us. Sometimes we take spiritual matters very lightly, but in fact, there's nothing more important than, because there's a lot for us as Christians to inherit. We basically, to state it very quickly, we inherit everything that Jesus Christ inherits, and we have eternal life. We have so many things to inherit. We will be rewarded and will become rulers of places. We in the eternal state, we'll even be more higher than the angels. So there's so much for us. There's so much at stake, and sometimes we, like Esau, just despise our inheritance and what God has promised us. So it's just an important reminder to consider those things. And so he sells his birthright to Jacob, and then Jacob gives him the stew that he made. So there itself, Jacob begins all his trickery, all his deception, all his subterfuge, and it's also, this whole story reminds us of how God sometimes does what is not goes against what is normally expected. That is, because of primogeniture, That is, the older one is the one who receives the property, he's the one who gets the inheritance. But God says, no, my purpose in an election will stand, and I choose Jacob over Esau. The older will serve the younger. So sometimes God sometimes does that, and it's like, even if you think about when Samuel the prophet goes to seek out the king, go and anoint the king. He goes to the household of Jesse, and he goes and he thinks, oh, Eliab, he's the one who looks like he's going to be a king. He looks king like, he's tall, he's handsome, he's well built. But actually, in reality, it's David. And then, Samuel, God tells him, see, man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. Again, the nation, the selection of Israel, God choosing Israel, it's not because they had something very impressive about themselves, something in and of themselves, some superior qualities. None of that. They were a small nation, weak and insignificant, and God says, I love you and I choose you. So, examples like that. Even Nathaniel says, regarding Nazareth, where Jesus comes of, can anything good come out of Nazareth? Jesus came out of Nazareth. The Messiah of the world comes out of Nazareth. So God basically specializes. Again, Paul says God uses the foolish things, the weak things, the things that are not, to nullify the things that are. So God specializes in using weak people and all that, so that He receives the glory. It's like, one preacher uses illustration where if there's a surgeon, a skilled surgeon in today's setting, with all the modern technology, all the instruments with which he can precisely make an incision and do a very successful surgery. That same surgeon, take him to the Amazon jungle, give him one Swiss Army knife and maybe some yarn to stitch up the wound. If he does it there, it's way more impressive in Amazon jungle than it is in the with all these amenities at his disposal, all the scalpel and all the technology that medical science has. It's way more impressive if he does it in that setting in the jungle. And there's somewhat of a parallel over there, even with God, where He takes people who are weak, people who otherwise won't make it, who otherwise stand no chance, and He specializes in making something special out of their lives using the limited talents and resources they have. Often that is the case. That doesn't mean He cannot use somebody who's powerful and born in an influential family with a silver spoon in their mouth. But He often specializes in using weak people, because when you see their lives transform, when you see them used mightily of God, in spite of their past, in spite of mistakes they made and all that, you know for a fact, without a shadow of a doubt, that this is God's doing. And that's how it is even with Jacob. If you look at it in the earthly sense, it almost seems like Esau was the more blessed man. It seems like he was more blessed than Jacob. Even if you read in the earthly sense all the blessings that he had, he was more well adjusted uh, when compared to Jacob. But God chooses Jacob, and He says He's the one who the line is going to continue through. All the covenant blessings are going to come through. And so that is Genesis chapter 25, verses 1 to 34. So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on this chapter. Anything stood out to you, or any questions of clarification that we might discuss? Um, Please feel free to unmute and share. Any thoughts?